Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to know that there are those who are joining us here on Zoom and also on YouTube. I want to say Shabbat Shalom to Annette and Abe, to Marlisa and Gary, to all the other people who might be joining us whose names I don't necessarily see. And we are going to begin with Shabbat Minha, and then in a short while after we do Shabbat Minha, we'll have teaching this afternoon by our rabbinic intern, Josh Jacobs. Until then, though, we start with our afternoon service with the Ashrei. We're on page 214 in Lev Shalem, page 226 in the thinner Slim Shalom volume, and page 558 in the older Sim Shalom. Ashrei Yoshevi Veitecha Od Yalilu Chaseva Ashrei Ham Shekacha Lo Ashrei Ham Shadonai Elohav Tila LeDavid. Tehilat Adonai Yidaber Pi Vivarech Kol Basar Shem Kodsho Leolam Va'ed V'anachnu Nevarech Ya Me'etav Yad Olam Hallelujah Uvalit Zion Goel Shavei Fesha B'Yakov Neum Adonai V'yata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael V'karazel Zev Yamar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzevot Meloch Ol Haaretz Kevodo V'tisayini Ruach V'shmacharai Kol Rash Gadol Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimekomot Adonai Himloch Leolam Va'ed. V'yivtechu v'chayudehi shemecha Hilo zavta dorshech Adonai Adonai chafetz leman tzidko Yagdil Torah v'yadir. So come now to the Torah service portion of our afternoon, which means some Torah study of Parshat Korach, which is what we're going to be reading in the week to come. If you'd like to follow along, we're on page 860 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, which means that if you're following along in a Tanakh of some kind, in a Hebrew Bible, then we are in chapter 16 of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, and we begin at the beginning of the chapter, verse 1. I'll start with a blessing, thanking God for the opportunity to study Torah with you, and then read the first aliyah that we'll read next Shabbat morning, but that we read throughout this week in anticipation of this week of Parshat Korach, the week of rebellion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kehat ben Levi v'Datan ve'Aviram b'nei Eliyav v'Hon ben Pelet b'nei Reuven vayakumu lifnei Moshe v'anashim b'nei Yisrael Chamishim u'matayim nesiei eda Kiryei Moed anshe Shem v'yikalu al Moshe v'al Aharon v'yamru aleihem rav lachem ki chol ha'eda kulam kedoshim uv'tocham Adonai Umadua titnasehu al kehal Adonai, vayishma Moshe, vayipol al panav, vaydaber el korach, vel kol adato lemor, boker, vayoda Adonai, et asher lo, v'et hakadosh, v'ikri v'elav, v'et asher yivchar bo, yakri v'elav, Zot asu kechulachem machtot korach v'chol adato u'tnu vahen eish v'simu alehen ketoret lifnei Adonai machar v'hayish asher yivchar Adonai hu hakadosh rav lechem b'nei Levi v'yomer Moshe el korach shimuna B'nei Levi, Hameat Mikem, Yivdil Elohei Yisrael, Etchem Ne'adat Yisrael, Ve'akriv Etchem Elav, Lavod, Et Avodat Mishkan Adonai Ve'lamod, Lifnei Ha'ida L'shartam, Ve'akrev Otecha, V'et kol achecha B'nei Levi Itach, U'vikashtem Gam Kehuna, Lachen hata v'chol adatecha hanoadim al Adonai v'aramahu ki talinu alav v'yishlach Moshe likro l'datanu laviram b'nei Eliyav v'yomru lo analehi hameat ki helitanu me'eretz avat chalav u'dvash lahamitenu bamidbar Ki tistarer aleinu gam histarer. That is the first aliyah of Parshat Korach. Before we move on from this Torah learning portion of the service, I'll ask if there's anybody who specifically this week has a yard site to mark with an El Maleh Rachamim. Annette, do you have somebody you're marking? So let's be sure that Annette is unmuted so you can let us know who that is and we can say that Al Maleh. You should be able to unmute Annette, I hope.
Okay. My mother, Pesha, but Shaul.
Pesha Shalom.
Pesha, but Shaul.
Got it. Okay. For your mother, Annette. שוכי במרומים, המסי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במלאות קידושים ותורים, כזוהר הרקיע המזהירים, את נשמת פשע בת שאול, שלחה לי עולמך, בגן עדן תהי מנוחתך, ענה ברחמים, הסתיריה וסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתך, אדוני הוא נחלתך, ותנוח בשלום על משכבך. Amen. Annette, is there a memory of your mother that's coming to mind this week or today in particular?
Well, just that my mom was just a really sweet woman. And she bore the loss of two sons, one 18 in the invasion of Luzon, and my other brother died at 40, but he was wounded. Tomorrow we celebrate D-Day. He was wounded several days after the invasion of Europe. My mother was the kind of person that when you walked into the room, she made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. And I read about all the forceful women that people have for their mothers. I wouldn't say that my mother was a forceful woman, but my mother was always there, and she was sweet and charming, and she made you feel very good, and was madly in love with my father, and uh, and that's my mom. I don't know what else to say. That was my mom.
Thank you for sharing that, and may her memory continue to be for a blessing, and your brothers as well, as we think about them on all these anniversaries of those really profound memories in our country's history and in your family's history in particular. And thank you for sharing this day of memory with us.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who is marking a yard site this week, either this past or this week to come, who has an Almali to be said? If not, then we'll move now to uh, the weekday. Sorry, look at the title of the Siddur, to the Mincha for Shabbat Amidah. If you are in the Lev Shalem, then we are on page 223. If you are in the if you are in the newer Sim Shalom, we are on page 234. If you're in the older Sim Shalom, we're on page 574. And the afternoon Amidah is said in a whisper and privately, and I'll step away to stand while doing so. Yai, dai, 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 dai. Yai, da, dai, 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 da, dai, dai, dai. Ya, da, dai, 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 da, dai, dai, dai. Ya, da, dai, da, da, dai, dai, dai. Yai, da, dai, 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 ya, da, dai, dai, dai. Ay, die, die, ay, die, die, die. Yai da die, die, ay, da die, die, die. Ya da die, 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 da die, die, die. Ya da die, da da die, die, die. Yai da die, 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 ya da die, die, die. Ya da die, 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 die. Ay da die, 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 die. Ya da die, 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 die. Ay da 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 die, die, die. Ay da die, 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 die. Ay da die, 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 die. Ya da die, 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 die. Ya da 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 We continue with the Leinu. We're on page 281 or 297 or 696. Aleinu lishaveach ladon hakol לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורר עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. הכתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Mourner's Kaddish is found on page 232 or 249 or 600. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah v'yama divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala ubizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevarach le'olam u'lamei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei dekudesha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata Damiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Hosei shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. So we'll turn now to some learning, and we welcome Josh Jacobs, our rabbinic intern. I'm glad you are here. Welcome, and Shavua Tov to you since you're in Cleveland. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I get to say Shabbat Shalom to you guys still, which is nice. Great to see everybody. Today for our learning, obviously we have Parshat Korach. First thing that happens is the big rebellion, which made me think that it might be nice to dive into Musar, into some examining of virtues and values, which clearly seem to be misaligned during the Korach revolt. So hopefully you're able to access the sheet. I'm going to share it for those who don't have it with them. Okay, can everybody see it okay? All right, so this first drash, most of this is going to be Hasidic drashes, and I'll give a little bit about the bios afterwards, but would anybody be interested in reading this first one? This is diving into that first, one of the first verses we get, Rav lechem b'nei Levi, you take too much upon yourselves, sons of Levi. When Korach comes to Moses and says, why are you the one who gets to be in charge? Aren't we all holy? I should be able to do more. And Moses responds, you take too much upon yourselves. You already have the priest, you already have these great roles as Levites. Would you seek the priesthood as well? You take too much upon yourselves. Any volunteer to read this first source? Feel free to unmute and jump right in. Great, Joanna, please. I think you're muted. There's a way to unmute Joanna. That'd be great. Maybe I have the power to do it. Great, I think you should be good now.
Okay, I'm unmuted now?
Mm-hmm.
Great. You take too much upon yourselves, sons of Levi. And Korach, who was wise, literally open, how did he fall into such foolishness? His eyes caused him to sin, according to Rashi. It's possible to say, according to what was brought in the work, Noam Elimelech. It is established for us that a blind person is exempt from the appearance offering, a particular sacrifice, as it is written, he will see, yirah, voweled differently than the accepted translation, which is yira'eh, he will appear.
Great. So I'll just pause there for a little context. You may have picked it up by the little parenthetical there, but basically the accepted translation of what he's referring to is a verse that says, this person will appear before the sanctuary to offer this sacrifice. But what they're doing is they're voweling it differently. Instead of yira'eh, he will appear, they're voweling it yirah, which means he will see and offer this sacrifice. So it's saying if a person can't see, if a person is blind, they would therefore be exempt from offering this particular sacrifice. So it's an interesting read here. Whether or not you buy that that's legitimate, it's necessary for this drash that a blind person would not be able to offer this particular offering. So Joanna, you can pick back up at meaning.
Meaning, a person needs two eyes, one eye to see and to observe the greatness of God, and the second eye to see one's own baseness, humility. And one who is blind in one of his eyes, meaning he has one eye to see the greatness of God, the Creator, but is missing the second eye to see his nothingness, is deficient in the mitzvah of appearance. And the high priest who enters the sanctuary, this entrance was a test of appearance for him, and he needed two eyes. But Korach wasn't fit for the high priesthood, because even though he arrived at the exalted level and saw the greatness of God, he was missing the second eye to see his baseness. He saw a great chain of descendants that would come from him, according to Rashi. They are all holy, Numbers 16:3. You would seek the priesthood also, later in Numbers, same chapter, and this is the meaning of his mind's eye misled him, according to Rashi.
So yeah, the end there is a bit jumbly, in need of some context, and it's a bit complicated. I think the message is actually pretty clear, which I'm going to ask you all for your feedback on that in just a moment, but it's kind of delivered in a complicated paragraph. So thank you. You did a beautiful job reading that. The end there is just the weaving together of these different verses to sort of explain the Korach's psyche behind it. There's a midrash, or Rashi says that Korach saw a great chain of descendants that would come from him, and that was what led him to this revolt, saying, if Moses gets all the glory, and I know that I have great descendants that come from me, why should I be in the shadow of all these great leaders, Moses and then my descendants? Clearly, I have to be a person of note as well. So he goes to Moses and seeks higher power. They're all holy, right? We know that if we're supposed to be a Goy Kadosh, a nation of priests and a holy nation, then it shouldn't be so centralized. We should all be able to have this kind of power. And leading to Moses's verse, which is what we're drashing on, right? You would seek the priesthood also, you take too much upon yourself. And this and Rashi says what this means is that his mind's eye misled him. So we go into this conversation about eyes and sight. So I want to open it up for some reflections on this piece. Do you agree with it? Does it resonate with you, this idea of having two eyes, one to see God's greatness, the other to see our baseness? Korach clearly had one because he was a person of note. That's what they're grappling with here. He wasn't just Joe Schmo. He was a very respected person of status and power and wisdom and insight. So how could he have done something so terrible? It must be that while he had one eye to see God's glory, he was, forgive the language, but blind in the other eye. He was missing the capacity to see his own limitation. So I wonder if this resonates with anybody. And in particular, we'll talk more about how it weaves into the next passage. But any thoughts and reflections on this one? Yes, I see a hand. Annette? I think you're still muted. Great, and we'll get
It's
Gary and Marlise afterwards.
Ameneper. It's interesting that he goes to Moses and asks for more authority.
Say more.
Isn't that interesting? That he is not thinking that he should be praying to God or Hashem. He goes to Moses. And he asks Moses for more power. Look at the authority that he grants Moses. Now, we've always said that Moses, whatever authority he had, came from Hashem. Hashem, God, meted the power out to Moses. And now Korah is going to Moses and asking for more power. I find that something to think about. That's all.
I think that's really interesting. I have my own thought for why that's interesting, but can I ask you what about that strikes you?
Well, for many years I was in sales, different type of sales, electronic sales. And I was dealing with factories. And if you wanted to get your parts out, excuse me, Josh, if you wanted to get your parts out, you didn't always go to the top guy, but you went to the one person there that is going to be able to help you get your parts. And I am saying that Moses had a power allocated to him from God. And why you would go to him and say, okay, I want more power. It's not clear to me, because I don't know that Moses would really say, okay, you should have this. What you're saying is, okay, if you want him to be your agent and say, if you want to be have a little humility and say, I would like for you to speak on my behalf.
Right. Thank you. No, I think that's really interesting. If Korach was so devout, he would know that the source of authority comes from God, not Moses. Moses, in fact, didn't want it. Moses said, send somebody else, right? So if he was truly as devout as he should have been, as he could have been, why not pray to God about it, to Hashem? Why?
Or ask Moses to act on his behalf.
Correct. Right. So it seems there's a bit of malice here, some political intent. Very interesting. Yeah, Gary and Marlise, you had something?
Okay. This was my thought. I mean, Korach was a major player, and he reveled on it. But I don't think but my thing is, his blind eye was not seeing the power above. His blind eye was not listening to the comments from below. I don't think he heard the comments. It's just not appropriate. They're doing anything else, because he only focused on what he wanted.
Nice. So that was a blindness, and that he was consumed with his own wants and needs and not those of others, which any good leader should be prioritizing. Thank you. Larry, yeah, I see your hand. Marlise, please. Yeah, and then we'll get to Larry.
Yeah, I guess the word nothingness and that to me seems rather extreme. But
good.
At the same time, you talked about limitations, and Annette said humility. So I think just not being so grandiose.
Great. So
is what I would
as
think is error, or being so grandiose.
Yes, thank you. No, I think that's a really good thing to point out, and keep it in mind as we go to our next text. I want to get to the other hands. I'm not going to move on just yet, but literally the word in Hebrew is like ephesut, from the word ephes, zero-ness, right? So it actually is kind of an accurate translation, nothingness, or shephelut too, like lowness, like shephelah, plain, right? So it is kind of a severe word, but you're right. It seems to be too imbalanced there, because at the end, right, I'm bringing this as an exploration in character. I think I titled this character as a balancing act. Right, so it seems too extreme to consider yourself nothing, right? Clearly, this commentary is saying he should have had an eye to his own nothingness, but you're raising the point that, well, that seems a little extreme. I don't know that we should consider ourselves to be nothing, and that we need to have that sight to see our nothingness. That seems a little extreme. Hold on to that, Larry, and then Joanna, and then we'll move on.
Shabbat Shalom. A couple of points. Number one, to the point about Annette's point about that the power comes from God. The Haftarah also echoes this theme about the people coming to the source of power. Here it's Korach and his and the others who are going to Moshe, and in the Haftarah for next week, it's the people going to Shmuel and basically saying we want a king.
Nice.
So there's that parallel. I like this passage. I like the business about the two eyes and about humility. First of all, supposedly Korach saw that his descendants would be great, and in contrast, though it doesn't say it, Moshe has no descendants who are great. So Moshe's legacy is not the legacy he leaves in terms of any line or that passes on. So that, to some extent, teaches us that that's not what's important. What's important is your teaching. And the point about the two eyes and humility, I think, is a very important one, especially in light of not just current events, but we can think back to almost all times where leaders who are powerful fail to have humility, and that's their undoing. Whereas Moshe, although I don't like hagiography, Moshe, we know, was very humble. If we go back to the first chapters of Shemot, he basically was saying several times that he wasn't the one to lead the people.
Absolutely right, and that weaves back to Joanna's point earlier as well. That I think it was Joanna, maybe it was Annette saying about this. Okay, sorry, then I think it was Annette. But just this point of the kind of person that would seek it out versus the person who would recognize that it's not theirs to give, right? To where you're seeking that source of power. Yeah, that was Annette. Joanna, I see your hand. I want to get to this next passage, so please hold on your thought, because at the end, I'd love to circle back. So don't lose what you're thinking, but I want to give the next text enough time because I love it. And keep in mind what Marlise said about is nothingness a little too extreme? Can I have a volunteer to read this one? Feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. Any takers?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. They tell this story. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, and by the way, another Hasidic drash. This one talks about the Chafetz Chaim. I have a little bio and one line. This is Rav Yisrael Meir Kagan. That's the Chafetz Chaim, 19th century Poland, Belarus. So this is a story about him.
Okay.
Go ahead, Marlise. Thank you.
They tell this story. Once the Chafetz Chaim was walking in his tower in Radzin,
His town.
Belarus.
He's walking around his town.
His town in Radzin, Belarus, on a dark and stormy night. The street was empty of people. A stranger delayed him, who arrived on his carriage, and asked him, "Where does your Rav live?" The tzaddik, the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim answered him, "Firstly, he is not a Rav, and second, he is no tzaddik." The stranger said to him in astonishment, "What are you saying? Everyone takes him to be a God-fearing man and a tzaddik." The Chafetz Chaim again responded to him, "What everyone says, that isn't anything. The world doesn't know him. I know him better and I can assure you that this is a big exaggeration and hyperbole." The man became very angry and let strong curses slip from his mouth, and finally whipped him with the whip that was in his hand. The Chafetz Chaim was very saddened that he brought this man into sin. After a short while, when the Chafetz Chaim returned home, he found the man sitting outside his house, waiting for him. When the man realized that this was the Hafetz Chaim, the same man he cursed and whipped, he was so shocked that he nearly fainted. The Hafetz Chaim calmed him and persuaded him with his words, saying to him, "It's nothing. You didn't do anything wrong. In righteousness did those lashings come to me, because it's not only forbidden to speak lashon hara, slander, gossip, ill words against others, but also about oneself. It is forbidden to speak lashon hara."
Great. Thank you. So any thoughts and reflections? I love this story. I want to know if it hits you the same way, and particularly if you can compare and contrast it to the first story about, right, with an eye to Musar. What values can we glean from these texts? How should we walk through the world? The first text says 2 eyes, one towards God's greatness and the other to your nothingness, specifically your nothingness. And then this text seems to say, well, there's a danger to this nothingness thing, because then you end up speaking so ill of yourself that you're committing lashon hara against yourself. And I think the whipping is an interesting symbol too, because it's a device in this story here that the stranger gets so angry that you're bad mouthing the great Rav that he feels the righteous indignation to whip, ironically, the Hafetz Chaim himself. But I think there's that like self-flagellation imagery there too, of like what happens when we are so hard on ourselves that we whip ourselves. Any thoughts, reflections on this, comparing and contrasting? How should we walk through the world according to these Hasidic teachings?
Well, it's
Please.
yeah. I was just going to say it's sort of in the title of your teaching about having balance in your self-regard, and like it's probably the regard of others as well, not to exaggerate, kind of see realistically and understand everyone has flaws and attributes.
Yeah, it's absolutely a balancing act, seeing that everybody has flaws and nobody's perfect. But I also wonder if there's like, I'm in my late 20s, and so I'm speaking of a certain life experience, and I wonder, on this call are people of all different ages and experience, and I wonder how our experiences differ, because for me, I'm in a stage of my life where I really struggle with this, being too hard on yourself. I'll just say, like, I'm in Cleveland because unfortunately my fiance's grandfather just passed away in a tragic, unexpected way, and I figured, even though she's in rabbinical school too, she could certainly lead the service for the Shiva Minyan, but she's Nogea B'Davar, she's too emotionally involved in this. I'm happy to step up and lead. So I led the Ashrei, and in Beth Am Shivas, I think usually you do it silently. Everybody sort of, you say the first verse and everybody then goes and does it. So I was doing that, and then I got nudged by one of Alex nudged me and said, you should say the whole thing out loud. And I kind of got tripped up by what nusach I should say, and if I should sing it. It's a shiva. I wasn't prepared because it wasn't what I was used to, and I ended up just like weaving in and out of different nusachot. I kind of dipped into Shabbat, and then I swerved back into weekday, and then did a little sprinkling of my own nonsense singing. And I just was kicking myself after that, because this is her grandfather's shiva, and I blew Ashrei, and I was whipping. I can't even do Ashrei right on something so important as this. And Alex was like, you gotta just cut yourself some slack. This is crazy. So, but I couldn't. It really. So I just wonder if anybody still finds themselves beating themselves up over minute things, or if you feel you're at a stage where maybe when I was younger, but now I'm more secure in myself and I don't do that. Larry, did you have something? Do I have to?
Got it. Yeah. First of all, I think we can all emphasize and put ourselves in your place in terms of beating ourselves up. And you shouldn't do it. And I'm sure you did a fine job.
Thanks.
But with all due respect, that's not what this story is about, I don't think. And this is not what the contrast in Korach is about. Because what it's really about is the false modesty. the false modesty that the Chafetz Chaim had in saying to the guy, he's not such a great guy, don't worry about it, where he simply could have acknowledged who he was to the gentleman. And he could have said, your praises are too much for me. And that's all this really required. The story that you're telling is another one for a different time that I can't help you with because I need the same sort of help. And I think that the contrast here is that an amount of a false modesty, not simply beating yourself up for your failures, is also, it needs to be balanced with the confidence that one has in oneself.
Great. So whereas I would have read this and my sort of chiddush or chap, what I gleaned from this would be, be humble, but don't be self-flagellatory. That's the right balance. You're saying, no, the danger isn't self-flagellation. It's false humility. That's the real danger.
Not being truthful.
Not being truthful.
He's not acknowledging who he was. And because he wasn't truthful, he let the man embarrass himself. And that was the sin. That he caused somebody to be embarrassed. This is a pretty well-known story. When you lead somebody into a way that they're going to be embarrassed, it's on you, not them. And you put them in a particular situation. If you're leading a service next time, and you are going to be a fabulous rabbi, so you say, what's the custom here?
Yeah.
If you asked that question ahead of time, what's the custom here? Then they would have told you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a practical advice, but it's also it's a deeper metaphorical one. So I appreciate that. I'll just say the final text here I added just because I felt I needed to. I'm sure we're all, or most of us are familiar with this one, but in terms of the balancing act, this has a nice image of two pieces of paper. It could be the same pocket, but for the sake of a literal balance here, I imagined one in one pocket and the other, keeping you literally navigating the world, walking through it in a balanced way. This is Rabbi Simcha Bunim, 18th century Poland. One should always have two pieces of paper in your pocket at all times. On one, it should read, I am a speck of dust, I am but dust and ashes. And on the other, the world was created for me. So again, if we had more time, I would ask us to see how this stands with the others in terms of avoiding false humility, not beating yourself up, seeing God's greatness, also somehow seeing your own greatness. And that is the final word I want to leave us with, which is humility, but not a false one. And also keeping an eye open to God's greatness, and given that we are created in the image of God, our own greatness, and not shying away from that important and empowering realization that we're all possessed of greatness, and through the cultivation of our traits, which Musar is all about, we can strive to navigate the world seeking a little more balance and masim tovim, good deeds. So thank you all for your contributions. Joanna, I'm sorry we didn't circle back to your final comment, but maybe we could leave it open a little at the end. I just want to make sure we keep on time. But thank you everybody for all your.
How is your fiance doing?
Oh, thanks. She's doing better. It's been really tough. She really loved him, and we celebrated his 85th birthday a month ago, which is just crazy. But we all had the opportunity to go around the table and say something we love about him. So in that way, I think he died knowing how loved he was. And so, but she's doing better day by day. I appreciate that. Okay, let's transition now to Mariv. I will pull it up for us. Let me get it open. Okay, great. One moment. Okay. if you are in Lev Shalem, this is page 264. Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals 281. Sim Shalom for weekdays 200. Dehu rachum yechaper avon lo yashchid v'hir bala shiva povle ir kol chamato Adonai Hoshia hamelech yanenu v'yom korenu Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'torah ma'ariv. Uma'avir yom u'mevi laila, u'matvil ben yom u'vein laila, Adonai tzvaot shemaho, El chai v'kayam tamidim loch aleinu l'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ariv ha'ravim, Avad olam beit Yisrael. Avtachal tasim memenu la'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem emet. Umalchuto v'ratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael cha'anu shira b'simcha rabba v'emru laham Mi chamocha ba'ilim Adonai Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh Norat hilot osei feleh Malchut charu v'necha b'kayam lifnei Moshe Ze'eli anu v'amruhu Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed V'ne'emar kifada Adonai et Yaakov U'ge'elo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Shalom. Ushmor tzeitenu ulo'enu lechaim u'leshalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Baruch atah Adonai shomer amo Yisrael la'ad. We're on 268 in Lev Shalem. I actually don't have the corresponding pages in the others, but I think it would be like 285 in Sim Shalom for Shabbat and holidays and 207 for weekday Sim Shalom. Not certain. 268 Lev Shalom. Baruch atah, Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'Amen. כי המלכות שלך היא ולעולמי תמלוך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלך, בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. We skip over Chatzi Kaddish and we rise for the silent Amidah, which begins on 270 in Lev Shalem, otherwise 286 or 210 for our silent meditation. Ose shalom bimroma vuyase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav huyase shalom aleinu ve'al ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen. Feel free to continue at your own pace. Otherwise, we will skip ahead to Mourner's Kaddish, Kaddish Shalem, which is on page 280 in Lev Shalem. Wait a minute. Oh, my mistake. We go straight to Aleinu and then we'll do Kaddish Tom together. So Aleinu, I invite you to rise if you're able. We are on page 281 in Lev Shalem, otherwise 297 or 696. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, lated gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu goye haratzot, velo samanu kimishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim. Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu notei shamayim veyoser haaretz u'moshav yikaro b'shamayim ima'am v'shchinatu zo begotei meromim hu Eloheinu ein od emet malkeinu efes ulato Kakatu v'torato v'yadata yom v'hashevota elevavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim imal ve'al haaretz mitachat einod. Kakatu b'toratecha Adonai yimlach le'olam va'ed v'nemar ve'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Kaddish Tom. If you are in mourning or observing the Yortzeit, I invite you to rise as we say together on 282 or 298 or 698. Does somebody want to recite and I'll say the amens? Is anybody currently in mourning or observing the Yortzeit? Yeah, Marlise? Okay, great. Oops. Let me get you. Okay, Marlise, go ahead. If you wouldn't mind leading us.
Okay. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei. V'chayachon u'vyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. V'agala uv'zman kari v'yamru amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Olalmei Almaya.
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Olalmei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal. Shemei d'kudisha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Da'amiran be'alma v'yamru amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.
Amen. Thank you, Marlise, for leading us. We'll transition now to Havdalah. Feel free to break out your Havdalah candles and your wine and your spices as we sing together. Ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na ya na 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 ya na 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 ya da da hi da 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 hi da ya da da hi da 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 hi da ya da da hi da 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 hi da ya da 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 hi da Hine el Yeshuati eftach velo efchad ki ozi vezimrat ya vayehi li shua ushaftem mayim besason mimanei ha-Yeshua l'Adonai ha-Yeshua alamcha virchatecha selah Adonai Tzevaot imanu Niskav lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach Adonai Hoshia Amelech Yaneinu Veyom Koreinu La Yehudim Haita Ora Vesimcha Vesason Vikar Kenti Elanu Kos Yeshuot Esa Uveshem Adonai Ekra Yada da 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 Yada da 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 Savri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael le'amim ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Shavua tov, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I wish everybody a peaceful and good and sweet new week. Shavua tov.